So if you were forced to look at the very last page of your life story right now, today, what would you actually want it to say?
Oh, wow. That is, yeah, that's a heavy question for a Tuesday.
Right. It is. But perhaps more uncomfortably, does the chapter you are writing right now, like today, actually match that ending?
That's the real kicker, isn't it?
Exactly. And that terrifying gap, between who we are right now and who we want to be remembered as, that is the exact space that Vipresh Dwivedi was just violently forced into.
Yeah. Violently is the right word for it.
Yeah, when well, basically a tangle of blood vessels in his brain nearly ended his life. And this was at the absolute peak of his career.
Right.
So today we are taking a deep dive into Dwivedi's 2025 book. It's called On the Last Page of Notebook. And I know that premise sounds like a super heavy, maybe morbid topic.
It does sound a bit dark at first glance.
It really does. But what we're actually looking at today is honestly one of the most practical, joyful, and just urgent manuals for how to live right now that we've ever covered.
I completely agree. It really, it completely flips the script.
Yeah. How so?
Well, we are so culturally conditioned to think of our lives as this, this endless sprawling runway.
Right, like we have all the time in the world.
Exactly. We push the reality of our final horizon into the shadows because, well, it's uncomfortable. Nobody wants to think about the end.
No, of course not.
But Dwivedi uses mortality as a mirror. He argues that by bringing the absolute certainty of our end into the light, we actually strip away all the daily illusions.
Oh, the noise.
Yeah, the noise, the cultural programming that dictates how we spend our time. It acts as this incredibly efficient filter for figuring out what actually matters, while we are still breathing.
I love that. An efficient filter. So, to really understand how he arrived at this philosophy, we have to start with the catalyst.
The physical catalyst, yeah.
Right. We need to move from this abstract idea of mortality into the very visceral, terrifying reality of his medical emergency.
It was a violent collision with reality, honestly. To set the stage a bit, Vipresh Dwivedi was basically the quintessential modern success story.
The guy everyone wants to be on paper.
On paper, exactly.
Yeah.
He was a highly active corporate professional, constantly climbing the ladder. He pushed his body to the absolute limits, too.
Yeah, swimming, boxing, hitting the gym.
Right. To everyone around him, and certainly to himself, he thought he was invincible. His life was progressing perfectly according to that script we're all handed about what success is supposed to look like.
Yeah, he is entirely invested in that narrative of accumulation and momentum.
Always moving forward.
Always. And then, literally without any warning, the physical infrastructure of his own body just betrays him.
Just completely shuts down.
Yeah, the text details this specific night where he wakes up feeling this strange, really unsettling dizziness.
He thinks he just needs to use the washroom.
Right. But when he tries to stand up, his left leg starts trembling. It just refuses to hold his weight, and it completely buckles underneath him.
And he describes this wave of intense confusion hitting him, and it's accompanied by this sharp chest pain.
Oh, man.
There's this chilling, suffocating clarity where time seems to just freeze entirely. And as he's collapsing, this singular thought running through his mind is, am I dying?
Which is terrifying.
Terrifying, because
Yeah.
what was actually happening is that he was suffering a severe stroke.
And it wasn't a typical stroke, right?
No, it was caused by something called an arteriovenous malformation, or an AVM, located deep within his brain.
Okay, let's actually unpack the mechanics of an AVM for a second, because I think a lot of people hear the word stroke and they instantly assume it's related to, diet or age or lifestyle choices.
Oh, if you think of cholesterol or something.
Exactly. But an AVM is something entirely different. It's basically a ticking time bomb that you can just be born with, right?
Precisely. It's a structural defect. So in a normal circulatory system, your arteries carry high-pressure, oxygen-rich blood from the heart straight to the brain.
Okay, high pressure.
Right. Then those arteries branch out into these tiny, microscopic capillary beds. And the capillaries are what slow the blood down.
So they sort of act like a buffer.
Exactly like a buffer.
Yeah.
They deliver the oxygen safely to the brain tissue, and then the blood flows out into the veins at a much lower, much safer pressure.
Got it. But an AVM messes that up.
An AVM completely skips the capillary phase.
Wait, so the high-pressure arteries are just dumping blood directly into the low-pressure veins?
Exactly. It's an abnormal, tangled web of blood vessels. And because veins aren't designed to handle that kind of intense arterial pressure, they stretch.
Oh,
Yeah, they
wow.
stretch, they weaken, and eventually, under the right circumstances, they can rupture.
Yeah, that is
That
terrifying.
is exactly what was happening inside the head of this supposedly healthy, athletic man. The high-pressure system failed, and it caused a hemorrhagic stroke.
So he wakes up in the ICU at a local hospital, completely disoriented, right? Just surrounded by monitors and doctors.
And the fatigue he describes is just absolute. It's not just feeling tired. He felt fundamentally drained of all life force.
Right. And then they transfer him to AVES, which is one of the premier medical institutes, and the neurosurgeons there tell him he requires gamma knife surgery to fix the AVM.
Yeah, and the description of this procedure in his book is just harrowing.
It sounds like sci-fi.
It does. Gamma knife sounds very sleek and futuristic.
Yeah.
But the actual physical reality of undergoing it is incredibly stark.
Right, because a gamma knife isn't an actual blade.
No, no.
It's a highly focused array of radiation beams, because if they tried to actually cut his skull open to reach this tangle of vessels.
The risk of catastrophic brain damage would just be way too high.
Exactly. So instead they use radiation. But to ensure those beams hit the precise millimeter of the AVM without destroying the healthy brain tissue all around it, his head has to be completely immobilized.
And they achieve that immobilization by literally attaching a rigid metal stereotactic frame directly to his skull.
With pins, like actual pins that go through the skin and secure right into the bone.
And he is awake for this.
That's the craziest part to me. He's awake.
He describes the hum of the machinery, the pulses of radiation, and just the profound claustrophobia of having his head bolted in place while his mind just kind of drifts.
He's lying there, totally immobilized, staring up at the ceiling of this machine.
Wondering if he'll ever walk out of that hospital. Or, if he
Oh.
will ever be the same person again.
It is the ultimate loss of control. I mean, here is a guy who controlled everything. His career trajectory, his workouts, his diet.
He was the master of his universe.
Exactly. And suddenly he is bolted to a table relying entirely on invisible radiation beams. But, what really struck me in the text is that the physical trauma of the stroke and the surgery was really only the first half of the crisis.
Yeah, the biological part.
Right. The second half, which he argues was almost more devastating, was the emotional and psychological fallout during his recovery.
Oh, absolutely. The grueling physical rehabilitation was a daily battle. Just waking up and having to test the most basic functions of your nervous system.
Can I move my toe today?
Exactly. Can I move this toe? Can I lift this finger? But as he was fighting just to regain his body, he realized that the world he had built his entire identity around had completely moved on without him.
The corporate ladder didn't pause.
It didn't care.
Yeah.
The ladder he'd sacrificed so much to climb didn't wait for his recovery. His workplace just seamlessly replaced him.
Yeah, he was treated as a discarded component. The company simply swapped out the broken part and just kept the machine running.
And that realization completely shattered him, because he had spent his entire adult life measuring his intrinsic worth by his professional achievements.
His output, his speed, his status.
Exactly. And when the ability to produce was stripped away, he was left with this terrifying void. Like, who was he if he wasn't the successful executive?
The best way I could conceptualize what happened to Dwivedi is think about running on a treadmill. You're at the gym, the incline is maxed out, the speed is high, you are sweating, you're grinding, and you're completely focused on those digital numbers on the screen.
The calories, the distance.
Yes, the pace. Your entire reality is that little digital screen. And then out of nowhere, someone just kicks the plug out of the wall.
Oh, why?
The belt seizes instantly. You are violently thrown forward. You hit the hard floor. And as you're lying there, bruised and bleeding, you look up the screen and it is blank.
That's a great analogy.
You realize those numbers never meant anything at all. They were just pixels.
That captures the sudden cessation of momentum perfectly. It's this violent ejection from the illusion of progress. Because when Dwivedi hit the floor, his entire concept of self was just wiped clean.
Blank screen.
Blank screen. And the text frames this not just as a medical recovery, but as a forced rebirth. He had to construct a completely new identity from the rubble.
Right.
And he found himself returning to painting and music.
Which is so interesting.
It is. These were pursuits he had long ago abandoned because, well, they didn't contribute to his professional advancement. They didn't add to his bank account.
He started prioritizing things that had zero ROI, no return on investment other than pure internal joy.
Precisely. He recognized that his previous identity was basically a suit of armor that he had put on to satisfy external expectations of success, and the stroke just ripped that armor right off.
But I want to pause here for a second and look at the cultural mechanics of this, because Dwivedi talks about how we chronically underestimate the brevity of life.
Yes.
But reading through his corporate experience, it feels less like we genuinely forget that we are going to die, and more like modern society systematically forces us to suppress that knowledge just so we can function.
That's a really sharp observation.
Right. Because if we walked around all day fully attuned to our mortality, we probably wouldn't care enough to answer that, like urgent 9.00 PM email or stress out about some quarterly review.
We'd never get anything done.
We suppress it as a survival mechanism for the modern economy.
And Dwivedi actually addresses that exact tension. He points out that society actively conditions us to measure our lives in delayed gratification.
Always looking ahead.
Always. We're taught to measure life in long-term milestones. From childhood, you're taught to look at the next grade level, then the college degree, then the entry-level job,
Then's promotion.
the 5-year plan, and finally, the retirement account.
It is a constant deferral of living. You are always living in the future tense.
Right. And that systemic focus requires us to be fundamentally blind to the present. We push mortality into the darkest corners of our minds because acknowledging it actually threatens the entire structure of that 5-year plan.
Because if time is uncertain, then sacrificing today for hypothetical tomorrow becomes a really risky gamble.
Exactly. It breaks the whole system. And furthermore, Dwivedi digs into the psychological architecture of why we avoid looking at the end. It isn't just a biological fear of cessation.
Okay, so what is the deeper fear then?
It's multifaceted. First, there's the terror of separation, that realization that we will be isolated from every single person, place, and experience we have ever known.
Which is a heavy thought.
It's massive.
Yeah.
Second, there's the anxiety of incompletion.
Right, the unfinished business.
We all carry this mental ledger of unfulfilled dreams, unwritten books, unsaid apologies, and confronting death means accepting that the ledger will just never be balanced.
It's just going to stay open.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, there is the profound confrontation with our own cosmic insignificance.
Oof.
The realization that the sun will rise, the traffic will move, and the world will carry on perfectly well without us. That is an incredibly humbling pill to swallow.
It really is. But I mean, the treadmill will eventually stop for every single one of us. Dwivedi just happened to get a very violent sneak preview of that.
Yeah, he did.
And as the book progresses, he moves outward from his own hospital bed to look at others who have had the plug pulled on their treadmills. He gathers these accounts of people who stared death in the face and survive.
Yes, near-death experiences.
Right, NDEs. And they serve as this massive data set for understanding human priorities.
Because NDEs act as the ultimate cognitive filter. When your biological existence hangs by a thread, the brain tends to strip away all that societal noise we were just talking about.
It forces clarity.
It leaves a startling, almost blinding clarity about what actually possesses value.
So let's look at a few of the people he highlights in the book. Starting with Kavita. Her story is fascinating to me because she is the archetype of the successful professional.
Absolutely.
She is a lawyer, she has climbed the ranks, she has the salary, the prestige, basically everything the culture tells us we should sacrifice our time to achieve.
But beneath the surface, she's experiencing this hollow, unexplainable void.
Yeah, the classic "is this all there is" feeling.
And then the catalyst occurs. She is involved in a horrific car accident that leaves her fighting for her life in the ICU.
Just like Dwivedi.
Very similar. And during the long, silent hours of her physical recovery, she is forced to confront that ledger we talked about. All the things she kept postponing for someday.
Like traveling, connecting with family.
Doing work that actually helped people, rather than just defending corporate interests.
So when her body finally heals, she doesn't go back to the firm to make partner.
No, she doesn't.
She walks away from the massive salary, the stability, the social status, and she takes a position volunteering at an underfunded school in a rural village.
And her peers are utterly baffled.
Right. They assume she has lost her mind from the trauma.
But Kavita notes that for the first time in her adult life, that hollow void is gone. She finally found a purpose that resonated with her internal compass, rather than external expectations.
That is so powerful. And then Dwivedi shares the story of Rajiv, right?
Yes, Rajiv. He's a middle-aged entrepreneur who embodies what we now call hustle culture.
Oh, yeah. The 80-hour weeks.
The guy sleeping under his desk, always chasing the next round of funding or the next expansion. He truly believed his relentless grind was a virtue.
Until his heart physically could not sustain the pace.
Exactly. He suffers a sudden, massive cardiac arrest right in the middle of a workday.
Wow.
And it takes weeks in the hospital for him to stabilize. And during those sleepless nights on the ward, just listening to the heart monitors, the illusion finally shatters for him.
He realizes his relentless pursuit of financial success had completely bankrupted his actual happiness.
He had missed his kids growing up. He had alienated his friends.
So what does Rajiv do? I mean, he doesn't read a time management book to try and fit more meetings into his week.
No, he abandons the tech grind entirely.
He goes back to a passion he had abandoned decades earlier, which was cooking.
He just starts a very small, simple catering business out of his own home. He focuses on the sensory joy of the food and the connection of feeding people.
And organically, it grows into a heartfelt restaurant chain. But his core motivation had completely shifted from extraction to connection.
Which changes everything. And finally, there is Aditi. Now, her catalyst wasn't a sudden accident like the others. It was a slow, suffocating decline.
Right, she was bedridden for months with a severe, life-threatening illness.
And when you were confined to a single room for that long, the external world just fades away. You are left entirely with your own thoughts.
And Aditi realized as she lay there that her entire life was basically a performance for other people.
She was trapped in a stifling, unsupportive relationship because she feared being alone. She was stuck in a mundane routine because she feared the unknown.
But when the illness finally recedes, that fear of the unknown is completely eclipsed by a new fear, the fear of dying, having never actually lived her own life.
So she leaves the relationship. She sheds the societal expectations of what a woman her age should be doing, and she pours her energy into writing.
And eventually becomes a best-selling author.
It's incredible. And what is remarkable about Dwivedi's analysis of these stories is how he distills them down. He systematically breaks down the universal psychological shifts that occur after a brush with death.
Yeah, he maps out 7 core lessons from the brink. Let's go through them.
Okay, the first one is confronting impermanence. We logically know life is fragile, right? But an NDE makes you feel it in your bones.
It's not a theory anymore.
Exactly. Life is not a marathon to be endured so you can rest at the finish line. It is a series of fleeting moments that you either savor or you miss entirely.
That makes sense. The second lesson recontextualizes pain. Because we usually view suffering as an isolating force, right? When we are in pain, we feel completely cut off from the rest of the happy, functioning world.
We feel like we're the only one suffering.
Right. But Dwivedi notes that these survivors realize pain is actually universally human. It is the great equalizer. When you accept that everyone is carrying some form of invisible grief or physical struggle, pain actually builds bridges between us.
It fosters a deep, radical compassion.
Yeah. The third lesson is about identity. He says identity is fluid, not fixed.
You are not your job title. You are not your bank balance. If Kavita can go from corporate lawyer to village teacher, it proves the labels we cling to are completely arbitrary.
Right. Fourth is the evolution of gratitude. Comfort rarely teaches us to be genuinely thankful, does it?
Never. We acclimate to luxury very quickly. But when you lose the ability to walk or to breathe without a machine, and then you regain it, gratitude grows fiercely in the soil of adversity.
It becomes this profound soul-level appreciation for just the baseline functioning of life.
Fifth is recognizing that human connection is a biological necessity. It's not a lifestyle convenience.
Right. The survivors all prioritize authentic, vulnerable relationships over, like, superficial networking.
Sixth involves the liberating power of forgiveness.
Yeah.
And particularly self-forgiveness.
That's a big one.
Dwivedi talks extensively about the resentment he felt toward his own body for failing him with the stroke. But holding on to that anger or holding on to past grievances with others, it only prolonged his suffering.
Because forgiveness isn't about excusing bad behavior.
No, it is about dropping a heavy weight so you can actually move forward.
I love that. And the seventh lesson. Transformation is never linear, but it is always possible. You don't just have an epiphany and wake up perfectly enlightened.
There are always setbacks.
Yeah, but the capacity to radically change your trajectory is always available.
Always.
Now, when you look at all these stories and these 7 lessons, something very obvious jumps out at you. None of these people, not Dwivedi, Kavita, Rajiv, or Aditi, came back from the ICU and thought, you know what? I really regret not logging more billable hours.
Right. I really wish I had answered more Slack messages on Sunday afternoons.
It literally never happens. But, I want to challenge the mechanics of that third lesson regarding fluid identity for a second.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, Dwivedi says they changed their lives and shifted their identities, but are people like Rajiv and Kavita actually adopting new identities? Or does the near-death experience simply act as, like, a solvent that burns away the fake, socially acceptable identities they were wearing, revealing the core self that was there all along?
That is a crucial distinction, and it strikes right at the heart of Dwivedi's philosophy.
Because it feels like they are returning to something, not creating something new?
The text strongly argues exactly what you're saying. Our true selves are not something we have to invent. They're the resilient essence left behind when the external distractions are removed.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think of it like excavating an ancient ruin. You aren't building a new temple. You are clearing away decades of accumulated dirt and debris to reveal the structure that already exists.
Wow, that's a great image.
Right. A near-death experience doesn't magically inject you with a new personality. It destroys the ego's attachment to status. Kavita became a teacher not because she ceased being a lawyer, but because the teacher was buried underneath years of conditioning about what success was supposed to look like.
So we see exactly how people restructure their lives when they survive the edge. They strip away the debris.
They do.
But Dwivedi forces us to look at the other side of the coin, too. What about the people who don't return? What happens when the AVM bursts completely or the heart doesn't restart?
Yeah, the people who don't get a second chance.
Right. We move into his examination of end-of-life regrets and the clarity people achieve only when it is literally too late to act on it.
And this section is universally confronting because it holds up a mirror to the choices we are making right now, today. Dwivedi synthesized data and anecdotes from palliative care nurses and hospice workers, and he outlined 3 incredibly common regrets expressed on deathbeds.
The first one is probably the most pervasive. I wish I had spent more time with the people I love.
It's the eternal tension between ambition and connection.
Yeah, and why is it that we consistently prioritize the ambition?
Because ambition offers immediate, tangible metrics. You could look at a paycheck, a job title, or a quarterly report and see definitive proof of your effort.
You get a grade.
Exactly. Connection, on the other hand, is intangible and long-term.
Yeah.
You don't get a quarterly performance review on your relationship with your child or your spouse.
That's so true.
And because the metrics of love are invisible, it is very easy for the brain to deprioritize them in favor of the urgent demands of career and accumulation. The tragedy is that on a deathbed, the material accumulation provides zero comfort.
Zero. True wealth, as Dwivedi notes, is entirely relational. It is measured in the hearts you have touched.
Exactly.
The second major regret is deeply tied to that identity discussion we just had. It's, I wish I had lived a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me.
Oh, this one is so common.
Yeah.
From a very young age, we are handed blueprints for how to behave, what to study, who to marry.
And we all possess an inner compass, right? A
Yeah.
quiet, intuitive voice that tells us what actually brings us joy. But the shouts of society, the expectations of parents, peers, the culture, they're so loud that they completely drown that inner voice out.
And conforming to those expectations is often rewarded with praise and stability, which just reinforces the behavior. The dying often realize that the safety they traded their authenticity for was a complete illusion, and they spent their one existence playing a character in someone else's play.
Which feeds directly into the third regret. I wish I had taken more risks.
Yes.
The fear of failure, the fear of judgment, the anxiety of stepping into the unknown, these things completely paralyze us. We stick to the miserable job because it pays the bills. We stay silent in relationships to avoid conflict.
And Dwivedi offers a really profound reframing of fear here. He argues that we treat fear as an enemy to be avoided at all costs. But in many cases, especially regarding personal growth, fear is actually a directional compass.
Wait, how so?
Well, if the thought of making a career change or speaking your truth terrifies you but also deeply excites you, that fear is pointing precisely to where your growth lies. Avoidance leads directly to regret.
So to combat these 3 regrets before it is too late, Dwivedi leans heavily into an ancient philosophical tool, memento mori.
Yes, it's a Latin phrase that translates to remember that you will die.
Right. And to a modern listener, adopting a daily practice of thinking about death sounds incredibly morbid, almost depressive.
It really does. But Dwivedi passionately argues the opposite. Historically, memento mori was etched into architecture, painted into still life art with skulls and hourglasses, carried as pocket watches.
It was everywhere.
It was. And it was not designed to induce despair, but to cultivate an urgent, vibrant awareness of the present moment.
You know, a lot of self-help literature compares memento mori to a vacation. Like if you know you only have 7 days in Hawaii, you don't waste day 4 staring at the hotel wall.
Right, the deadline makes it sweet.
Exactly. But I think there's a better, maybe more structural way to look at it. Think about the economic concept of scarcity.
Okay, scarcity.
Why is a diamond so incredibly expensive while water, which literally keeps us alive, is virtually free?
Because diamonds are scarce.
Because they're scarce, things derive their value from their finite nature. If human life were infinite, if we lived forever, a Tuesday afternoon would have absolutely zero value. You could always put things off until next century.
That's a fascinating way to frame it.
Time is the ultimate fiat currency. And the only reason a cup of coffee with a friend or a walk in the park holds any profound beauty is specifically because you have a limited, unknown allocation of days.
Right.
Memento mori is simply recognizing the scarcity of your own time, which instantly inflates the value of the current moment.
That scarcity analogy is brilliant because it explains the mechanism of why the practice works. When you deeply internalize that your time is a finite, depleting asset, the clutter of daily annoyances just loses its grip on you.
Because it's not worth spending the currency on it.
Exactly. The traffic jam, the rude comment from a coworker, the minor financial setback, they suddenly seem like terrible investments of your limited emotional capital. Memento mori forces you to reallocate your attention to high-value, authentic experiences.
Okay, so we have the diagnosis, we know the regrets we want to avoid, and we know the mindset we need to adopt.
Right.
But if philosophy is useless if you can't operationalize it, right? How do we actually build this life? Dwivedi shifts gears from the existential into the highly practical here.
He introduces his framework, the 4 pillars of fulfillment, and he pairs it with a really radical approach to the goals we are chasing.
Let's get into the 4 pillars.
So the 4 pillars are his foundational architecture for a meaningful life. The first pillar is love, but he pushes past the superficial, romanticized version of love we see in movies.
What's its definition?
He defines it as authentic connection rooted in vulnerability. It is the courage to let your guard down, to admit your flaws, and to hold space for the flaws of others. It is the quiet, sustained effort of being present for someone else.
The second pillar is purpose. And this is where I think so many people get stuck because we naturally conflate purpose with our careers.
We totally do.
Yeah.
What do you do for a living? Equals what is your purpose?
Exactly. But Dwivedi separates them entirely. Your job pays your mortgage. Your purpose is what generates internal joy, regardless of whether anyone pays you for it or even notices it.
Yes, and crucially, he argues that purpose is not a fixed destination. It is a living, evolving organism.
So it changes over time.
Exactly. The purpose that drove you at 20 might feel completely irrelevant at 45. And that evolution is a feature, not a bug.
That takes a lot of pressure off. The third pillar is gratitude. And this goes beyond just saying thank you when someone holds the door.
He discusses gratitude as a neurological practice. When you actively scan your environment for things to be grateful for, you are engaging neuroplasticity.
You are literally rewiring your brain.
You're rewiring your brain's reticular activating system to notice positive stimuli rather than defaulting to the brain's evolutionary negativity bias.
Which is always looking for threats.
Right. Gratitude shifts your baseline state from scarcity to abundance.
And the fourth pillar is presence. In a culture that just idolizes multitasking, having 50 browser tabs open, optimizing every single second for future gains, true presence is basically a radical act of rebellion.
It really is. It is the ability to anchor your consciousness entirely in the current physical moment.
Now, setting up these pillars and finding purpose naturally leads to the creation of goals, right? But Dwivedi introduces a concept here that completely subverts Western achievement culture.
He includes a section on reconciling with the unfinished.
Yes, and he posits a deeply countercultural idea. Not every goal must be achieved.
That's a tough one for a lot of people to hear.
It is. He suggests that having unfulfilled dreams doesn't make you a failure. It simply proves your capacity to hope and imagine. To explain this, he draws heavily on Japanese aesthetics and philosophy, specifically wabi-sabi.
Yes, wabi-sabi is a worldview that finds profound beauty in transience, asymmetry, and imperfection. It is the absolute acceptance that nothing lasts, nothing is finished, and nothing is perfect.
Whereas in the West, we measure the value of a life by the final, polished product.
We think the goal is to tie up every narrative loose end before we die. But Wabi-Sabi argues that the frayed edges and the unfinished symphonies are where the beauty actually resides.
He also points to the physical art form of kintsugi, right? Where broken pottery is repaired using lacquer mixed with powdered gold or silver.
Instead of trying to hide the cracks and make the bowl look perfectly new again, the repair highlights the fracture. The philosophy is that the breakage and the repair are part of the object's history, which makes it more valuable, not less.
Okay, but I have to push back on how we apply this to our daily goals.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about the messaging we are completely saturated with. Winners never quit. Grind until you make it. Never give up. It is the mantra of modern business and self-improvement.
It's everywhere.
So here, Dwivedi is essentially handing the reader a philosophical permission slip to abandon their goals. How do we practically distinguish between giving up on something because we are just being lazy or fearful of the hard work versus letting go of a goal out of genuine wisdom and wabi-sabi?
It is a phenomenal question. And the friction between hustle culture and letting go is really the core of modern anxiety.
Oh,
Dwivedi handles this by asking you to examine the origin and the weight of the goal.
the origin and the weight.
Yeah. Think about your smartphone. If you open an app, use it, and then never close it, it just runs in the background.
Right.
Over years, if you keep opening new apps without closing the old ones, the background processes consume all your RAM and drain your battery. Your phone becomes sluggish, it overheats.
Oh, that is a perfect analogy for how we handle personal expectations.
Exactly. We set goals in our 20s based on who we were then. A decade passes, we evolve, our values change, but we keep that old goal running in the background of our minds.
It's just draining our battery?
Clinging to an outdated or externally imposed aspiration tethers you to a past version of yourself. It creates immense cognitive load. Quitting, in Dwivedi's framework, is not about laziness. It is about intentionally force-closing the background apps that no longer serve you.
So you can actually use that RAM for what matters today.
It frees up your processing power, your energy and attention, so you can fully engage with the present moment and your authentic, evolved passions. Wisdom is recognizing when a goal is transitioned from a compass guiding you forward into an anchor dragging you down.
So it requires really aggressive, honest discernment.
It does.
And to help cultivate that discernment, Dwivedi moves from theory into a series of actionable exercises for the soul. He provides specific psychological friction points for you to work through.
The first exercise is writing your own eulogy, but he places a strict constraint on it.
You can't talk about work.
Exactly. You are not allowed to mention your resume. You cannot list your promotions, your degrees, or your net worth. You have to imagine how you want to be remembered based entirely on intangible gifts.
Like, what was your wisdom? How did you display compassion?
How did people feel when they walked away from a conversation with you?
The psychological mechanism there is basically reverse engineering. If you want people to say you are an incredibly present and empathetic listener at your funeral, you have to start putting your phone away during dinners today.
It forces alignment between your current actions and your desired legacy.
Right. Now, the second exercise is the jar of priorities. This one is all about resource allocation, because we all face a constant barrage of inputs, and we really struggle to distinguish between what is urgent and what is truly important.
This is essentially the Eisenhower matrix applied to your soul. An email from your boss, marked with a red exclamation point, feels urgent. Your nervous system reacts to it as a threat.
But taking your dog for a walk or sitting on the floor with your kid is important.
Right. Dwivedi asks you to visualize your life as a jar. If you fill it with the sand and pebbles of urgent or trivial tasks first, there is no room left for the big rocks of love, purpose, and health.
You have to ruthlessly put the important things in first and let the trivial sand fill the gaps.
Exactly. The third exercise deals with the heaviest emotional baggage. Forgiveness as freedom. Dwivedi argues that unresolved conflict is a toxin.
Holding on to deep anger or resentment towards someone who wronged you is often described as drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Right. But he introduces a critical nuance here. The hardest person to forgive is almost always yourself.
That's so true. Why is self-forgiveness so incredibly difficult?
Yeah.
Because we can logically extend grace to a friend who makes a mistake, but we brutally crucify ourselves for years over our own failures.
It comes down to cognitive dissonance. We like to view ourselves as good, competent, rational actors. When we make a mistake that causes harm, it shatters that self-image.
So to forgive ourselves feels like we're just lowering our standards.
Or letting ourselves off the hook. But Dwivedi notes that carrying that guilt paralyzes growth. Self-forgiveness isn't claiming that what you did was okay. It is acknowledging that you were a flawed work in progress then and allowing yourself the grace to be better now.
Now, after looking so deeply inward with these psychological exercises, the book takes a really fascinating turn. Dwivedi pans the camera out globally.
He does. He dedicates a whole section to exploring how different cultures and philosophies across human history have engineered systems to handle the heavy, terrifying weight of mortality.
And he does this to provide contrast to the modern Western approach to death, right?
Exactly. He looks at Mexico's Dia de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead. And this isn't a somber, black-clad mourning period. It is an explosion of color.
Families build those vibrant altars, the ofrendas, filled with marigolds and the favorite foods of the departed.
They visit cemeteries not to weep in isolation, but to tell stories, play music, and actively invite the spirits back for a shared celebration of the journey.
He also highlights various African funeral traditions, which often involve really intense community participation, rhythmic dancing, communal storytelling that can last for days.
Then moving east, he delves into Buddhism. In Buddhist thought, death is not a final, terrifying wall. It's a transition within the cycle of rebirth, or samsara.
The focus is on the Four Noble Truths and the practice of non-attachment, recognizing that all suffering stems from clinging to impermanent things, including our own bodies and identities.
He pairs that with Hinduism, looking at the concept of returning to Brahman, the ultimate reality. He quotes teachings from the Bhagavad Gita, emphasizing the importance of performing your earthly duties, your dharma, with absolute dedication, but remaining completely detached from the fruits or results of that labor.
And to ground it in Western thought, he brings in Stoicism, particularly the writings of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius.
Right. Stoicism teaches the rigorous discipline of focusing only on what is within your control, your mind, your reactions, your character, and accepting everything outside of your control, including your inevitable biological death, with calm equanimity.
You know, as I was reading this section, I kept wondering why he spent so much time on global anthropology in a book about personal fulfillment.
It seems like a detour at first.
Right, but then I visualized the contrast. Think back to the beginning of the book. Think about the clinical, sterile, terrifying environment of that ICU. Dwivedi's is isolated, bolted to a metal frame inside a humming machine. He is facing his mortality entirely alone under fluorescent lights.
Yeah, the contrast is stark.
Compare that hyper-medicalized, individualized isolation to the warmth of an altar covered in marigolds, or a village dancing together.
That contrast is the exact point he's trying to make. The modern world has institutionalized and sterilized death. We hide it in hospitals and deal with it in isolated family units, which maximizes the terror. By synthesizing these global lenses, Dwivedi proves that death, and the grief that accompanies it, is meant to be a collective experience.
It is about nervous system regulation. When you are alone with your fear, your nervous system spirals. But when you are surrounded by a community engaged in shared rituals, whether it is chanting, dancing, or sharing a meal, your nervous system co-regulates with the group.
Precisely. By stepping out of our individualized dread and observing humanity's shared frameworks, we tap into a profound ancestral solace. You realize that billions of humans have walked this exact, terrifying path before you, and they built these rich, philosophical systems to help you carry the weight.
You are not an isolated anomaly. You are part of an immense, ongoing human tapestry.
Which brings us to the culmination of Dwivedi's work. We have journeyed through the trauma of the ICU, the ego death of near-death experiences, the philosophy of memento mori, and the global rituals of grief.
We are at the final hurdle.
How do you take all of this massive existential weight and actually apply it to a regular Tuesday morning? How do you live it?
It really comes down to redefining the concept of legacy and implementing highly specific daily friction points or habits to keep you anchored. Let's talk about legacy first, because if you ask 100 people what they want their legacy to be, they usually talk about building a company, endowing a scholarship, or having a building named after them.
We equate legacy with permanence. We want to leave a monument that proves we were here.
But Dwivedi completely dismantles that. He argues that pursuing permanence is a fool's errand because time eventually erodes every monument and forgets every name.
Instead, he redefines legacy as the power of micro-interactions. Legacy is the ripple effect of your daily conduct. It is the warmth of giving a lost stranger directions. It is the patience you show a frustrated clerk.
It is writing down your life lessons in a notebook, hence the title of the book, to offer quiet guidance to your children. Legacy is not permanence. Legacy is presence.
Legacy is presence. And to cultivate that profound level of daily presence, Dwivedi gives the reader a checklist for a fulfilled life. He outlines 10 specific daily habits.
And looking at them, you can really group them into 3 phases of the day: morning grounding, daytime friction, and evening closure. Let's walk through these because this is the operational playbook for inner peace.
The first phase is about taking control of your nervous system the moment you wake up. Habit 1 is beginning your day with gratitude. Before you touch your phone and let the world's anxieties flood your brain, you consciously identify 3 simple things you are grateful for.
Habit 2 is practicing mindful breathing, even just for 5 minutes, to lower cortisol levels.
Habit 3 is embracing movement with awareness. This isn't necessarily a grueling workout. It is just noticing how your joints and muscles feel as you stretch or walk.
And habit 4 is savoring simple moments. When you drink your morning coffee, taste the acidity, feel the heat of the mug. Don't just gulp it down while reading an email.
So the morning is about anchoring the body. Then we move into the daytime habits, which are all about inserting friction to stop the mind from running away. Habit 5 is unplugging with intention, setting rigid boundaries with your screen so you aren't constantly context switching and frying your dopamine receptors.
And habit 9, skipping ahead slightly, is staying present during transitions. This was my favorite one, honestly.
That's a game changer.
When you commute to work or even just walk from the kitchen to the living room, don't let your mind race to the next task. Use the physical transition as a cue to take a breath and reset.
Finally, there's the evening closure phase. Habit 6 is creating a dedicated nightly wind-down routine to signal to your physiology that the day's threats are over and it is safe to rest.
Habit 7 is cultivating compassion through small, intentional acts of kindness.
Habit 8 is reflecting with curiosity, not judgment. When you look back at where you failed during the day, don't beat yourself up. Ask, why did I react that way? Like a scientist observing data.
And habit 10 is celebrating small wins, acknowledging the tiny victories to reinforce positive momentum.
When you look at those 10 habits, they are incredibly practical.
Yeah, I immediately go back to the Japanese concept of kintsugi that he brought up earlier. Our modern lives are often fractured, right? Our attention spans are shattered by notifications, our energy is cracked by stress, and we feel scattered. These 10 daily habits act as the goal blacker.
They are the deliberate, mindful practices that take the broken, jagged pieces of our Tuesday and mend them into something cohesive, intentional, and beautiful.
That is the ultimate goal of the framework. Dwivedi calls it achieving inner peace, but he defines it mechanically. Anxiety and stress require a specific environment to survive. They thrive in the tension between regretting the past and anticipating the future.
By using these 10 habits to aggressively anchor your nervous system in the present moment, you deprive anxiety of the oxygen it needs to survive. You step off the treadmill entirely.
Okay, let's take a breath and look back at the incredible architecture of what we've explored today. We started with the Vipresh Dwivedi's terrifying wake-up call, bolted to a gamma knife machine, realizing the corporate identity he built his life around was an illusion.
We mapped the 7 psychological shifts of those who survived the edge.
We learned how to use the scarcity of memento mori to dodge the 3 great regrets of the dying. We embraced wabi-sabi and the power of force closing the background apps of unattainable goals.
And finally, we looked at the 10 daily habits that allow us to build a legacy based on presence rather than monuments.
It is a sweeping, deeply integrated roadmap. It successfully takes the abstract, existential terror of our mortality and distills it all the way down to the granular biological reality of how you should drink your morning coffee.
It really does.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on the book's central metaphor of life as a book. So often we carry this immense, crushing stress because we believe we are responsible for writing a single, massive, cohesive novel.
Right.
We think the narrative has to make perfect sense from chapter 1 to the end. We believe the ending has to perfectly tie up every loose thread from our past. And if our current reality doesn't match the grand plan we had at 25, we feel like we are failing the story. But what if your life isn't a novel at all? What if it is actually a collection of short stories?
But I love that.
Think about the person you were a decade ago. Think about the career path you poured your soul into before a major pivot. Think about the relationships that meant everything to you for years, but eventually ran their course and ended. We tend to view those as failed chapters in a broken novel. But they aren't failures, they are completed short stories.
You were a different character then.
Exactly. You are navigating a different setting with different motivations, and that story reached its natural conclusion. As you face your own mortality and you think about the final page that Dwivedi forces us to look at, maybe you can drop the heavy burden of trying to tie up every single loose end from your entire past.
You don't have to make the whole book make sense.
You only have a responsibility to write a beautiful, authentic, and deeply present ending to the current short story you are living right now.
That is a profoundly liberating perspective. It grants us the permission to let the past remain the past and focuses all of our creative energy entirely on the page we are on today.
So, as you go back to the rest of your day, take one mindful breath, savor one simple moment, put a little gold lacquer on the cracks. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.